all governments have debt, right? This is just a part of how governments function. The United States is, hundreds of billions, or I don't even know if it's over $1 trillion in debt now. This is just part um, of how governments, fund public projects, right? Um,
Mm.
Most governments, just it's just like having a loan, right, or having a mortgage or a car payment or something. It's you go into debt, but you're paying off that debt, so everything's fine. But Puerto Rico, because of its precarious economic situation, which, if you're me, again, not to belabor the point, but part of the colonial status and the limitations, the restrictions that puts on, Puerto Rico's economic development, not to mention the more direct economic exploitation that happens. Puerto Rico's very limited economically, so it's been very reliant. The government has been on debt to just fund its operations and to fund public projects. And as the economy, got worse, after the Great Recession, talking 15 years ago now, 10 15 years ago, it got to a point where Puerto Rico could no longer pay its debt, and so we had this huge debt crisis. I think the total was over $70 billion, not counting pension obligations, which is a sort of separate but related thing. Um, so Puerto Rico gets to the point in which it can no longer pay its debt. Now, what usually happens when you can't pay your debt, you declare bankruptcy. And there's a structured process for you to be able to pay down some of the debt at least, and the people who you owe money to aren't going to get all of their money back, but they're going to get some of it, and that's how it gets worked out. Problem is that because Puerto Rico is a colony, Puerto Rico cannot file for bankruptcy. Like, Congress had actually taken away Puerto Rico's ability to file for bankruptcy when they amended its bankruptcy code back in the 80s. Um, and so Puerto Rico's in between a rock and a hard place where it's got all this debt, it can't pay it off, it can't file for bankruptcy. So that's how we end up with La Junta and a lot of this other stuff that I know we're gonna talk about. Um, and get into this process where you have the U.S. government getting involved um, to create a process for Puerto Rico to restructure its debt. Um, but that's kind of the basics of how it all started. I mean, you could go back years and years and years to talk about the roots of Puerto Rico's economic crises and things like the elimination of Section 936 of the tax code, which
Right, right.
was a big part of propping up Puerto Rico's economy, and Congress took that away too. So um, yeah, it's kind of a big and complicated story, and you could start it in a bunch of different places and even decades. But I think the basic is, Puerto Rico needed to issue a lot of debt to fund the government. Basically, it got to a point where it couldn't, pay that debt, and because it couldn't file for bankruptcy, then we ended up with these laws like Promesa and this financial oversight board.
If I'm not mistaken, even one of the previous governors, right? I think his name was Fortuno or something like that. Wasn't he taking out incredible loans from all these big banks at like 500% interest rates or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, all governors and governments of Puerto Rico have been responsible for accruing, this debt, some more than others, and it did grow.
Mm.
I think more than in some other cycles during Luis Fortuna's governorship. But again, it's one of these things, kind of like I was saying with Trump and and Hurricane Maria. Like, it's more than just one bad guy who made bad
Right,
decisions. It's like a deep structural issue of the fact that Puerto Rico does not have the tools of economic development and the ability to thrive economically under its current status. So it gets stuck in these terrible kind of cycles of you know debt and again, like, almost like, it's not a perfect comparison, but almost like what happens to an individual. Like, if they can't thrive economically, well, they're going to take on a lot of debt because they still have to, like, buy food and pay bills,
right.
right? So it becomes a structural issue where you're kind of stuck in these vicious circles.